Yeah. Uh, my name is Tom Brink. My wife Cyndee. We're from Altoona. And I don't know if you noticed the title or not. It says Learning to Lean. That has nothing to do with the hymn. I grew up in a Catholic home. We were Catholic by name. A little similar to Bill and the pastor this morning, in the morning session. And I told him it's not how you start, it's how you finish in life is where you need to be. But this Learning to Lean, I want to tell a little bit about the title, tell a little bit about myself, and then we'll go into the storms. The first slide I want to show you is this. How many know what this is? It's a drilling rig, absolutely. I drilled for natural gas. I was 18, I got a job on one of these. You work, depending on what style of rig, you can work anywhere from 60 to 120 feet in the air. You start out on the ground, but then you graduate up. And this job took me all over Pennsylvania, West Virginia, where have you. But I had a job working up in the derricks. That's the part that's up in the air. And so you had to climb up there to get up there. And when you were, not when you were drilling, but when you were, they call it tripping out or tripping in, when you would drill down one joint at a time but pull out two or three depending on how high your derrick was. And the derrick man, which is the job I had for a while, you had to go up there and you had to tie a belt around your waist. You had a belt and it had a 3/4 inch rope that went back to the handrail to the back. And you tied it off there and you had to lean out to do the work. And as these pipes would come up, you had to grab a hold of it, unlatch it, grab a hold of it, stick back and put it in the derrick. Now, I didn't like heights. And when I first started, it was like, are you kidding me? And so being forced into position because the guy who was supposed to work up there didn't show up for work, I had to go up. And so let's see the next one. So there you are, you're standing up there, you're holding this pipe. The blocks is the yellow stuff that goes up and down. And I had a gentleman behind me who had worked it before, and he said, you got to lean out on the rope. And I'm looking down at 100 feet or 80 feet, and I'm thinking, okay, I can do this. So I do one of these, you know. He says, no, you got to lean out on the rope. So the first one come up, I unlatched it, goes back in the back. Now these two together, they weigh about 3,000 pounds, so you're talking 1.5 tons, so we had to go back there and push them all, get them all back. All right, next one. He did it again. This time I went back there. This time Charlie is not thrilled with me whatsoever because it's a lot of work to do this. And so we finally get the third. He told me, lean out, lean out. So the third one, I'm like this. I said, all right, I can do this. They come up. I'm like this. Guess what Charlie did? Kicked me in the middle of the back. And when he kicked me in the middle of the back, the only thing I knew was like, I'm out at the end of the rope. And my stomach's in my throat. I am calling Charlie everything in the book but anything nice. And as I'm leaning there, his words to me was, you got to trust the rope. You got to lean out and trust the rope. That's the only way you can do this job. Little did I know. I did this job then for another 5 years after that, working like that guy did up there. And leaning out so far that people look at you and think they're crazy. It's not natural at first. It doesn't feel like that. But the more you experience it, the more comfortable you become in leaning out. I did not know that was going to be a theme throughout my life and through our married life, throughout ministry together. Because we're directed to trust in the Lord, right? Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. Easier said than done. Easier said than done. There have been many times in our lives that we found ourselves stretched to the end of the rope. We have done what we could do, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, now what? We got to trust. Before you can let someone direct your paths, two things have to happen. One, you must be willing to give up control. You must be willing to say, okay, Lord, it's yours. He shared this morning about being Lord and Master. It's yours. I am willing to give up control. And number two is this. If you're willing to give up, you got to allow them to actually direct and control your life. Because sometimes we'll say, yes, Lord, this, but our actions say, no, I got this. And in our lives, we got to be able to lean out on that rope. The more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. So in the time we're together, we're going to talk about sharing. We're going to share some of our navigation, the storm, so to speak, through the and our ministry together started back, our journey started, 1987 was when we got called back into ministry. I'd been working, we'd built a new house, we'd been married for a few years, we had 2 young children, and all of a sudden I felt God working on my heart that he wanted me called into full-time ministry. It was not an easy decision. I didn't know if I really wanted to do this or not. Church was great. I was Sunday school superintendent. Things were going well. I just didn't know if I wanted to go full-time. It wasn't easy, but you have to be obedient. And God was faithful. We sold our house. The lady who bought our house bought it in record time. She bought everything down to the pictures on the wall. The only thing we took to college was a bed and a TV, I think. The rest of it she bought. We didn't even have to have a yard sale. We thought we'd have to have a moving sale, but she bought everything else that was left. But we moved from that house into the common room of the men's dorm because our apartment wasn't ready at college yet. And so we went from our new house to an 18 by 18 room with 2 kids. It was quite an adjustment. Wasn't always fun. Wasn't always easy. But God provided, and our lives were forever changed in going to school. And our lives have never been the same since then. And then from there, I became a youth pastor. Because during that time of college, it was a struggle between being a father, being a provider, being a husband, being a ministry leader, trying to juggle all these things that you're supposed to be in college, yet I'm married and have 2 kids and trying to provide and work 40 hours a week for my wife and kids, and it just didn't go very well all the time. And then we moved to Washington, and that was our great adventure. We moved sight unseen. I'm going to have Cyndee come up and share some of that because some of this comes from the wife's perspective when you have to sell everything and pack everything again and move cross-country to a place you've never seen before.
And it was really exciting because they said, you know, we prayed about this. We had never seen this place. They hadn't had a pastor in years. And they said, we really can't pay you anything, but we have a parsonage that you can live in. But the last pastor's wife that was here, she cried when she came to the parsonage. So we just want you to know this ahead of time. So we're like, oh, who cares? God's in this and we're going. So we packed up our kids, went in a U-Haul, went across the United States from Altoona to Granger, Washington, pulled into town.
And my first thought was, I have enough money to turn this thing around and get back home. Because in my mind, I was thinking the Olympic National Forest, with trees and everything. Granger, Washington sits in the Yakima Valley. It's a desert, less than 6 inches of rain per year. Everything's brown and ugly. This is in August.
So it was really rough, and we got there, and we went to church our first Sunday. First of all, we pulled into town, and we pretty much unloaded everything ourselves, and nobody showed up, and we're like, this is weird. So we go to church, and I think everybody there was 80 and over, all 5 of them. And so we were like, I said,
7 first Sunday.
I told him, I said, honey, the good thing is I don't think you can lose too many unless they die. So, but anyway, and that's the truth. But anyway, we got there, and the Lord just started pouring out his blessings, and it was just so neat to see what God did. But that first year, we had nothing. But we were really, really super excited because instead of nothing, they paid us $25 a week. And so he was working part-time, and we were on this little limited income, and we had our kids. And I just want to say when God, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, I was framing houses at the time. And so I'd work from 5 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, then come home and work at the church. And one of the things I loved to do was always put my kids to bed, read to them, pray with them before they went to sleep. And we had a pie ministry, and it got to the point where I was delivering pies to new people. And the church was growing. God was doing good things, but there were 3 nights in a row I missed going home to see my kids and pray with them and what have you. And so I remember saying, Lord, something's got to change. Something has to change. I go to work the next morning. The boss walks up and he said, hey, I'm sorry to do this, but you're last guy hired, first guy to get laid off. And I'm thinking, Lord, that's not what I was thinking had to change. That's paying all the bills. And so that was in October. Go ahead.
And he came home and told me, and I was like, oh, right, that's what we prayed for. And so, but God provided. But during that time, I just want to say that when you hear from God and when he directs your path, you have got to hang on to that with everything that you have, because he is so faithful. It was like November, and I remember I was vacuuming the floor. Well, no, it was in December, because we were going to have a Christmas party. And so I had everything ready, and I was getting ready for this party, and I remember just talking to the Lord while I was vacuuming. And I said, Lord, you know, I love it here. It would have been so neat, though, if we had a little bit of money that I could have gotten my kids something for Christmas, because I had like 2 presents on layaway somewhere. But, you know, but I was like, just a fleeting little prayer. And I stand here before you so humbled how God is so amazing. 2 hours later, I have a knock at my door, and it was the FedEx guy. A person from our church from back here in Altoona had sent gifts for our children, and there were 2 boxes of gifts 2 hours after I mentioned that little prayer. And God was like that the whole time, that we were just, even though, you know, when we look back at our lives, that seemed like a big storm at the time, that seems so teeny tiny compared to the things that we walked through. But God was faithful, and he provided every single time. And even with $25 a week, we never went without. And our kids even look back to this day and say that was their most favorite time in ministry, was that time in Granger, Washington.
Even when Ken Smith, the farmer, says, listen, I had another beef, and I'm getting rid of the old beef. Do you want any of this? It's only a year old. Absolutely. We ate steak. We ate roast. It was like, this is pretty cool, how God provided through that time when we expected nothing but got everything. And again, just to reiterate, God is faithful. You walk in what he tells you to do, no matter how difficult it may seem at the time. You got to learn to lean. You got to learn to trust. And the more you do, I'm not saying it's always easy, but it becomes more comfortable to trust him. If you trust him in the little things, then you can work to trust him in the bigger things. And then we came back to Pennsylvania, and I had my hip replaced in 98, 99, March of 99. See, when you get a certain age, you forget all this stuff. In March of 1999, I had my hip replaced. And it was one of those things where I believe God was calling us back from the state of Washington back to Pennsylvania to plant a church and to be a pastor to my family. As I said, I grew up in a Catholic home, and some things weren't so great there all the time. But I was able to, when we came back, we started the church, and God blessed us in that, to people, where people got saved, but my family, from my dad getting saved on just a week or 2 before he died, from my uncles, and being there for co-workers that I worked with 20 years earlier, when Sunday was only another day to make money working on the rigs, to where they had told me the first time I stopped to see him, I don't want you to pray with me, just go to work, to stopping in, praying with them, leading them to the Lord, and they passed away that afternoon. It was just tremendous what God did in all of that. And there was blessings in the ministry. But in the blessings, sometimes life brings us heartaches and situations. And one of the most that we have is my youngest son, our youngest son, Corey.
We were in Punxsutawney at the time, and we were planning this church, and we were building a new home once again. And we were at home, and my son had been not feeling well. We thought that he just had mono, and so he had gone and, no, it was mono. And so we went and called the doctor, and the doctor said, we'll have him go get blood work, and then we'll be able to roll out mono. And got a phone call that afternoon, and the doctor said, I need you to get your son to the hospital right now. He has leukemia. And we were like, this can't be so. And he's like, go to the hospital. I'll have the oncologist. Not yet.
No.
Not yet. But go to the hospital, have the oncologist come, and he's going to be there to talk to you about this. We walked there. The oncologist was actually waiting at the door of the hospital for us. And he said, I'm so sorry, but I have really bad news for you. Every cell that I see is leukemic with your son, and it is a very extreme case. You got to put some masks on, get him to Pittsburgh Hospital. I don't know how long you'll be there, but this is very serious.
It was unbelievable, because he is 17 years old. He is playing soccer every night. He is playing basketball a couple times in the morning, and
Working
and running. Thought he had a cold. He didn't look, I mean, he was 195 pounds, 200 pounds, somewhere around there, solid kid. Never in a million years would I have guessed that he was sick.
And so, through this time, before this, I mean, I was just like a big proponent that you ask God and he answers your prayers. I would pray for people and see them be healed. I would go in and see God move in these tremendous ways. And then all of a sudden my son has the AML, which had the kind that he had a 95% chance of not being alive in 5 years. And so they told us this is a really bad prognosis. Things aren't real good, but let's see what happens. And so we went to the hospital, and I can remember everything was just a blur. And Tom and I were a wreck because this was our son. Our son was like, Dad, I know the Lord. If I die, I go to see him. If I live, I get to be with you guys. I can't lose in this. And we're thinking, how did you give us such a blessing? And so that's what we walked through, but it was a horrible storm in my life personally because everything that I thought I knew about the Lord was challenged during that time. We would go and his liver enzymes would be through the roof. And I would go lay hands on him and pray for him and fully expecting, like every other time in my life, that he was going to be healed. I would come the next day, they were worse. He had his chemotherapy, and they said, sometimes it makes him sick, sometimes it doesn't. And I said, oh, Lord, he's been so faithful to you. And, I know he needs a chemotherapy, but please don't let him get sick. Sick as anything, throwing up till the blood vessels were popped out all over his eyes, and he was black and blue when you would see him. Everything. And I can remember getting in the elevator and riding up to his room, and I remember a song that I had sung, and it was, You Have Been Good. And the one verse in it said, if I never get to see another rainbow or share another laugh with a friend, if I never walk barefoot by the ocean or get to kiss my child goodnight again, I still would say you had been good. And honestly, in that moment, I thought, I can't sing that song anymore. I don't feel like you're good. I don't feel like you listen to me. This is my son. Why would you use me to heal other people? Why would you answer my prayers time after time? And my son is dying and he's getting worse. Where are you? And it was a time, I would like to say that I handled everything wonderful and I was just in a great mood and everything was good. But it was something that I had never walked through before. And it was something that I couldn't understand because God didn't perform the way I thought he should. And it was just a rough time.
And then coming from the pastor's perspective, I'm leading the church. We pray in faith and we pray believing. And I can honestly say I was shook to my foundation of belief because my son lay dying. And every prayer wasn't answered. And I don't know how many times I'd be like, why, Lord? Why, Lord? And you identify with people that ask why. You just want an answer. Why? My oldest son, we about lost him too because he wasn't serving the Lord. But if Corey, who does good and serves you, is stricken with cancer, how kind of a good God is that? And how do you answer him when inside you're crushed as well? And you're wondering, and how can I stand in front of a congregation? I couldn't. And it wasn't until I had that conversation with Corey at night, and we're talking about things because I would spend the nights with him. Cyndee spent most of the days with him. And he was struggling. He said, I just want to be normal. And I got to the point where it was like, okay, Lord, I quit asking why because there's no answers. What next? What do you want me to do next? And from that point on, it became a day-by-day walk. Some days were good. I wish I could say I walked in faith and was believing every day. I can't say that. Some days were good. Some days weren't so good.
And then some days weren't so good. He got through, went into remission, and then he had to have consolidation chemotherapy. His second round of consolidation chemotherapy, he was in tremendous pain. He was at home, and I had to struggle to get him back to the hospital because he was in so much pain. And so it was, to make a long story short, we finally get him to Pittsburgh Hospital. They are giving him morphine. because his pain is uncontrollable. Then they find out that they think he might have appendicitis. At this point, he has no platelets, and he has no white blood cells. So he has no way for his blood to clot, and he has no way to fight any kind of infection, and he has to go in for a surgery. And so we didn't know what to do. And so they were giving him morphine, and he stopped breathing and crashed. And they had to bring the crash team in, and they had to use 2 vials of Narcan to bring him back, and then they put him into ICU. At that point, he's in ICU. He is intubated. He is filling up with fluid. And the nurse came to me, and he said, "You need to know your son's dying. His blood pressure is 60/40. His heart rate is 220. He's dying. If we don't do anything, he will be dead within hours. If we operate on him, he has a 75% chance of dying. What do you want us to do?" And we were just devastated, but what do? He has 25% chance we're going for surgery. And so we walked through that, and when they went in there, his whole large intestine was dead, and it had died inside because of the chemotherapy. And he had 3 liters of fluid on his abdomen that they removed. Just so happened, though, when we were at Pittsburgh Hospital, it took hours for this surgery. It was so horrible. We just were sure they were going to come back and say that he died, because they told us that that's pretty much what was going to happen during the surgery.
Every time the elevator door would open, I'd be standing there waiting to see the doctor. And because for some reason, I guess I wanted to be the protector. I don't know. I wanted that news first before anybody else. I wanted to be able to break it to my family, to break it to everybody else. I don't know. But every time they come up and they weren't there, it would be and it took hours and hours and hours.
But when the doctor came up, he said, it just so happens that the pediatric anesthesiologist was on call today, and he was there during your son's surgery, and he saved your son's life. If it wouldn't have been for him being here, we would have lost him. And the surgeon would come in around the clock. He was there like every few hours. He was unconscious and intubated for a week. They didn't think he was ever going to come through this time.
They thought there was brain damage?
They thought there was brain damage because he had the time that he hadn't breathed for a while. And so we just didn't know. And all through this time, I was devastated because this was my son. This is my baby. I just thought, oh, Lord, how can you do this? And then he woke up. And he had this huge surgery, and that's what the next picture, he was cut from there to there. It was left wide open because he couldn't fight the infection. And so this was after he healed, but he had an ostomy bag, and he had cuts all over him, and he had tubes everywhere you can possibly imagine.
He weighed about 149 pounds.
Yeah, and but anyway, God was faithful. And he woke up, and he got better little by little by little. And every day we would just thank God because we didn't know how long we would have him. We didn't know what would happen because they said the prognosis isn't good, comes back real fast. And then they said, the one thing that we need to tell you is he's sterile. They will never have children. He'll never have children if he does survive because that just isn't a possibility.
He had 2 bags for a while that he had to wear.
Yeah, so it was just a really bad time. But it was really exciting because I was in nursing school, and whenever I graduated from nursing school, he was able to be there. That's him.
With the dark shirt on.
And he pinned me, so I was so excited. But anyway, that was
2004.
Yeah. And this is my son today and his twin boys.
That he would never have, yes.
And there he is. Yeah, they came and they said, Mom, we're pregnant. And I'm saying, you, Corey, for real? And it's such a miracle because that was something that was never supposed to be done. And yet God is so faithful. That's what I say. And in the midst of this, and when we've looked back at this, we walked through such a horrible time, and it was hard for us. And you talked about as a couple, when something happens to your kids, you just hurt. And that's how we were, and sometimes we didn't deal with it real well. But after we walked out of it, we learned so much because we would have really well-meaning Christians that would come in and say, God's not going to give you more than you can handle. Oh, I wanted to strangle them. And then to have all the verses to tell you how everything was great and everything in your life stinks. And you're like, and it wasn't helpful. But you know what? That was me. I would have done that because I had all the answers. I pray for people and they're healed, and I do this, and this is great, and I pray and God hears me, so let me pray for you. But it humbles you because you realize that there are times when you pray and it doesn't happen. There are times when you seek God and you see nothing.
And you know how empty you feel inside because you have just given everything. You poured everything out, and there doesn't seem to be an answer.
And so we learned through that season in our lives. I think we've become much more effective in the ministry that way because when people are hurting, what ministered the most to us is when somebody just came and sat with us, didn't say anything, just were there, and they said, we know that everything hurts right now, but we love you, and we're going to sit with you, and we can't make anything better, but we are going to love you. And it changed our perspective. And through it all, we've learned that God is faithful. And, and it's just been an amazing walk. But that's a testimony of how God turns around a bad situation.
Yeah, and even in that, and I'll throw one more thing in there. I'm thinking of how do you handle your child getting well when you see the kids that he was there in Pittsburgh with that got diagnosed die one after another, and funeral after funeral of kids who died, and your son lives. And it was difficult, and we know families, Rusty's parents, that couldn't handle it, and they went their separate way. They couldn't handle the hurt and heartache. So those of you who have walked through, lean on each other. You got to trust in the Lord, but lean on each other, because that God can make something good happen out of the midst of it. And our marriage is stronger, I think, because we walk through that. Even though at times during it, I don't think we liked each other a few days. But afterward, you look back and you think, wow, we walked through this together. We made it. We made it. And Lord, it was our commitment to the Lord that kept us together. But it was the power of the Lord that brought us together in a new fashion so that we were able to minister to others.
And I think the thing that the Lord spoke to my heart through that whole thing was, do you love me for who I am or for what I will do for you? Will you love me if I never do anything else the way you want it done? Will you serve me if your son dies? Will you serve me if I never heal him? Will you serve me if I don't answer your prayers when you pray for people? Will you serve me? And I know that it came to a breaking point one night, and I just cried out to the Lord, and I said, I will serve you no matter what. Take him, I'll serve you. If you decide to let him stay, I'll serve you. But it was a breaking point to see where we were with him. Was it about what he does? Is he just this big Santa Claus in the sky that we put our requests in and he's supposed to bring us our Christmas list? Or is he a God who is truly in control, who knows the beginning, who knows every day planned out for us before one of them came to pass? That we can trust him and say, wow, you're a great God, no matter if everything is great in my life or not. And so it was a really big learning season for us.
Yeah, Daniel 3 took on a new emphasis in my life. It says, when the three men were in the fire, it says, and their answer to the king says, "O king, we know our God can deliver us from your hand. But if he does not, we will not bow." And that was something that had to come to terms and grips with. Lord, if you do not, we know you're able to heal. We're able to know to bring us through this. But if you choose not to, we still will serve you. And it was something that I said, it's hard to believe that sometimes it seems like a bad dream until we relive it and talk about it sometimes. And it's like, wow. Well, from there, and Corey continued to grow. And as you can see, he's a young man, 31 years old now. And that was 17 when it happened. Our oldest son is 33.
And that's Jackson and Ian, our first grandchildren. Aren't
Yes.
they adorable?
We weren't grandchildren for a long time, and now we have 3 in 1 year.
They're
so,
the best in the world. Okay, anyway.
Anyhow, so
Other than yours.
after the church in Punxsutawney, we planted the church in Punxsutawney, and God did some great things there. And after all of this, Cliff became the associate pastor, and he's now the full-time pastor there. And God called us to Michigan, took us to a church that was hurting there. was great for us because it became family to us, and ministry was fantastic.
Talk
Church-
about the frosts and the sun.
Yeah.
We came from this frosty time where we thought I thought I was gonna die. We go to this place in Michigan, and we instantly fell in love with this church, and they fell in love with us. And we just, the church tripled in size, and our hearts tripled in size because we love these people instantly. Like, our problem was on the holidays that we couldn't get around to all the people's houses that we were invited to, because we would go, honestly, and I'm not exaggerating, we'd go to some place for breakfast, for lunch, a different place for lunch, and one place for supper, and then go to somewhere else for dessert, all in one day. And we just loved everybody, and it was just like the most perfect time in our lives. And we thought, this is it. We're going to retire here. We're finally going to settle down. This is going to be wonderful. And so we had this burden laid on our hearts for the orphan children and for the fatherless. And we thought it was going to be in that area, and we had pursued a whole bunch of different options, and every door had closed for those options. So the one Saturday night, Tom and I were praying, and we knelt down in our bedroom, and we were seeking God, and we said, God, we'll do anything you want us
Dangerous
to do.
prayer.
Don't ever
Dangerous
do
prayer.
this unless you really mean it.
Unless you really mean it.
We're thinking across the neighborhood, okay? And we said, okay, just Lord, whatever. You just show us where these children need us, and we will go there. We will, just whatever you want, because we were searching different communities in that place. Well, the next day we had the speaker come into our church that was speaking about their trip to Uganda. And I told Tom, I said, I don't really feel like going to church tomorrow. I don't really care much about Uganda. Isn't that awful?
You have to. You're a pastor's wife. You got to be there.
And that's really terrible. I mean, I should care about Uganda. I'm just telling you, that's my weakness there. And so I was just like, I really like your preaching, and I really just wish you were preaching this morning. And so I tell you all that to say that I wasn't going to this service like with this open attitude of, what do you want us to do, Lord? I was just trying to get through the day. And so the one thing that the Lord had shown us when we were looking really to help kids that were aging out of the system, and we were going to start what we called a house of hope. And so he had researched the name, and we were going to use this for our organizational name, House of Hope. Nothing came from that.
Parachurch organization, nonprofit, there's only so many that you can choose from. So I listed and got a board of directors and incorporated laws and what have you. We're getting ready to launch this as a parachurch ministry.
So we're sitting in church with our little friends from Uganda, and they put up their slideshow, and no kidding, second slide, it says, House of Hope, Uganda welcomes you. And I'm not kidding. We both looked at each other and went, oh, you have got to be kidding me. And we instantly, it was like, that's where I want you to go. And we were thinking, there's no way. We love it here. We don't want to leave. And the last place I want to go.
Here.
One of my favorite
nice.
songs was, Please Don't Send Me to Africa. I don't think I've got what it takes. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway.
We'll make a long story short because we only have like 20
Yes.
minutes left. Yeah.
So anyway, we go through this whole thing. We raise all the support, and we go to Uganda.
Worst thing ever, raising support.
Yeah, that was
Missionaries come here, please treat them nice because we
It's
were
not
all
easy.
over the United States.
Yeah.
If I knew you were no, we've
Oh,
had
yeah,
people point their finger in their face and call us all kinds. Yeah,
We really hated the whole support thing, and it was funny. The first place we went, I'm not kidding, we have to tell you this really, once again, this is navigating the storms. We were in this arena, and he never mentioned anything about support. And we talked to these people, and I'm looking at him thinking, how are we ever going to raise the money if you don't say anything about money?
And I knew God checked me not to say a word about money in this particular crowd.
And so we passed out our prayer cards and said, please pray for us. And this one man flipped it over, and he said, well, if I wanted to support you financially, how would I do that? And when he did this, I'm not kidding, this little old lady stood up and she went, if you're going to talk about money, you get your stuff and get out. Just get your stuff and get out. And I'm standing there, and I was horrified. And then she went on and on. If I would have known you were coming, I would never have come to this place. I'm never coming back.
I wanted a Bible study.
So this was
So
our first. We have a weird life.
Yeah,
so
the
I'm just telling you.
compassionate man that I am, after she said that several times, I said, I had a Bible study prepared. I just didn't share it.
But anyway, that was our support raising. So as you can tell, that wasn't easy. So anyway, we do raise the support. We go there, and one of our one of the things that we were doing that we were so passionate about is we were working with an organization that it's very similar to Compassion International, where you give a certain amount of money, it goes to the children, and then they in the States volunteered their time. So we were so excited about this organization because they sent the entire amount overseas. So we were so excited. But our job was to go over there and make sure that these kids were getting the money from the pastors that we were supposed to be working with in Uganda. So we get there.
And come to find out that at first they were kind of, abrasive. They didn't want to embrace us at all. It was like, no. They were wanting to know what power, what authority I have, all this stuff. So it should have been a clue, but we didn't take it that way. And we finally, I got a young man by the name of Joram, who was my driver, who I got to disciple and meet with every week and pray and read the Bible together. And he was actually a Kenyan living in Uganda, and got to trust him. And he was very honest with me and very straightforward, so I got to trust him very well. Kathy was a lady who became Cyndee's friend, stopped at the house. And so she knew like 5 different languages, all the dialects. And so she was our translator when these guys would break into Luganda that we couldn't understand. And Joram was my driver. Joram took us through a riot sometime. Sometime we'll tell you, but we don't know that time.
To back up a little bit, we didn't know the language. And so when we would go to try to investigate these things, it was real hard because they would talk in Luganda, even though the national language was English. And so this girl, this Kathy, showed up at our house the day before we were supposed to go and check out these orphanages and to check and to see if the kids were getting the money. And it just so happened that she was an Compassion International child. And it had worked for her, and she had gone to college, and she was so blessed by this. So when she found out, she was like, I'll go with you. So she went with us, and we went to these different places where these children were supposed to be, and we found one by one that the children weren't sponsored. The children weren't getting the money. One man alone was receiving like $3,000 a month, and none of the children were getting the money.
And the average wage is 78 cents a day. So they have less than $1 a day to live on. He's getting $3,000 a month.
And so then
he was doing all right.
When we
and they had some of the kids had dirt floors and stones on their floors and
starving to death.
And he wasn't giving them the money; he was keeping the money for himself.
And then they had been given tons of money, thousands and thousands of dollars to go and build this orphanage, or not an orphanage. They were building this refuge place for girls that were supposedly rescued from sex trafficking. And so nobody had ever been there sight unseen because they had to orchestrate it because it was out on an island in the middle of nowhere.
Lake Victoria, if you know anything about Africa. But
so
Lake Victoria.
We decided, with the help of our driver and our interpreter, to sneak out to the island. And it was just us. There was nobody else in Uganda except the 2 of us.
And nobody knew we were going. And so, after a while you get to thinking, how crazy are you? We're 50-something-year-old, we're in the middle of nowhere. Nobody in the States know where we're at.
No.
They had no idea.
They didn't even know we were doing this because this was our secret mission.
Yeah, because we wanted to catch him at what was he doing. And so we first drove a couple hours on, all I can say were like logging roads. I mean, African roads are horrendous. And so we finally got there to the ferry. And this is the ferry. This is a picture of the ferry that we rode across. I thought we'd just pull in a car and go across. Nah, it's a floating piece of concrete with some people and stuff on it. There were about 200 people altogether. And if you'll notice, I think the next slide shows it. This guy has a Pittsburgh Steelers jacket on. We're 8,000 miles from home. I know he doesn't know who the Steelers are, but he's wearing a Steelers jacket. And the next slide shows him as well. I had to make sure that you understood. I'm a Steeler fan. But anyhow, so there we are. We get across there. And because we had to leave our car on the main island, it was an hour and 45-minute ride on this ferry out to Buvuma Island. When we get to the island, Cyndee is the one in the middle. Kathy is the one on the end of the motorcycle and her driver. We had to rent motorcycles.
I'm scared of motorcycles.
And she don't like motorcycles. I love them, but the next picture shows it's not like my Harley. There was 3 of us. Well, 3 on Cyndee's, 3 on Joram's bike, and then 1 in my driver because he wouldn't. And anyhow, I won't go into that story just because I was fat and heavy. The other guys had to push uphill a little bit on some place, but we rode for an hour back through the jungle to get back to where this facility
And
was.
honestly, we were the only white people. I mean, people were running out of their homes going,
Mzungu,
Mzungu, Mzungu.
which
That means white.
person, but
And
yeah.
and so I am thinking, I am 50 years old in the back of a motorcycle in the middle of a jungle in Africa. Nobody knows where I am. What in the world are we thinking?
Only you, Lord. Only
So
you.
we got to the place, and it was exactly what we had expected. There were no children there. There were no girls there that were saved from sex trafficking. He actually had little girls there that he was making them pay to go to a really horrible school. The girls were crying, and they didn't have food, and so all this money. And we found out later that what they would do is when they knew that the Americans were coming, they would send people out there, and they would give a story and say,
They'd set up all the sewing machines, set everything up like this is what they were doing. As
So-
soon as the Americans leave, they pay them a few dollars, and they'd all tear everything down and leave.
So in the midst of that, we found out what was happening, and then they found out that we knew. And then it became very dangerous for us there because we removed the money from the hands of these people.
Yeah,
And the good thing is, Kathy, the one that you saw in that behind me on the motorcycle, she is in control now. And these children that weren't getting any money, she is making sure that they get the money that is being sent. So once again, it was a very scary thing, but we were there 6 months, and we were supposed to be there 2 years. And we were like, did we miss it? Was that slide like a setup from Satan? Like it was terrible. It was a terrible 6 months, and we were on the go, and we were hiding, and we were trying to make it back alive. And you just wonder, Lord, where are you in that? Because we thought we would be on the mission field the rest of our lives, and we're there for 6 months.
Yeah, and before we left the island, once they knew what we were doing, they called all the guys inside, hid them in the room, wouldn't let us go, stood at the doorways, and I knew ministry as we knew it was over. And so we got on the bikes and paid the motorcycle guys not to leave. We drove back to the ferry. Guess what? You got to wait another hour and a half, 2 hours for the ferry. So this is what we rode. We borrowed a boat from Jesus' day that they had there. The next slide shows the other view. I mean, this is how it is. It's wood and iron put together. And it only took us 45 minutes to go across the water. Of course, there's no life jackets, no anything. Just like, okay, I don't know what the waters are like in the lake, but we made it across there. We got there, got out, went to visit another orphanage. I got run out of time. We went to visit the other orphanage and ended up, it was horrendous as well. From that point, it became, they were trying to track our moves. They wanted to know where we were, what we were doing. We left. We actually planned a visit to South Africa, which is like 3,000 miles or so flight down to the southern tip of Africa to get away and work with some pastors down there. Well, then pretty soon the phone calls and the emails start coming. Want to know where you go, when you coming back, all this stuff. It ended up, and I'm going to tell this, it went up to the point where my wife ended up in the emergency room because there was so much that was going on. And we ended up, I made the executive decision, you're going home. I didn't tell anybody in the States except our children and the people who were picking her up. Flew her out in May. I went back to the country of Uganda because I had copies of my passport and birth certificate and stuff like that. I didn't want falling into the wrong hands. And so I went back and I did, and I'm not a big fan of the movies, but The Bourne Identity, how he wipes everything down. I went into to our apartment, gave away everything, our bed, our chairs, everything. Took all our five totes I think I had left of all our belongings, put it in the hallway, and then went on the run, so to speak. I lived out in the country for a few days, lived with 6 people for a few days, and they were coming looking for the Mzungu, the white person called Tom. They would show up on motorcycles, they'd show up in cars. They were looking for me. And fortunately enough, I was able to stay 1 step ahead or 2 behind, whatever it took, and got to the airport and had a little trouble getting out of the airport. But once I got out, I was free, and I was back to the States.
And so we had no idea at that time what we were going to do. But once again, God is faithful. And so we had been in the missionary church for 27 years and never had any intention of leaving that. But Bishop Rob had known us from years ago. And actually, Spring of Hope, before it ever started, he had asked us if we would be interested in starting that church plant 20-some years ago. And that never came through. And he contacted us when we got back to Altoona and said, you remember that church I wanted you guys to plant 20-some years ago? It's open. Would you go and check it out and see if God would want you there now? And we're like, we thought we can't just dismiss this because it came out of nowhere. But it ends up that we're back at Spring of Hope, where we've been for a year with the Brethren in Christ Church, and it's our first experience with the Brethren in Christ Church. So it's been a very eventful year, and it's been a very eventful time in our lives. But I'm going to end by saying God is faithful, and He's been so, so good and faithful.
Which brings us to today. We all know we walk through storms, and sometimes you handle them well, sometimes not so well. As a pastor, I want to give you something to go home with. Proverbs 3:5, if we reiterate that, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths. A couple thoughts I want to give you. Number one is this. The verse begins with a command. Trust in the Lord. This isn't a suggestion. This is written in the voice of a command. It's a command to be obeyed or rebelled against. You can either trust in Him or you can rebel against it and don't. The second is God calls us to complete trust. Trust in the Lord with what? All of your heart. Trusting in God is more than just giving this intellectual assent to say, yes, I agree with what God has to say. It's not only here, but it's also here. I agree, and I allow Him to direct my steps. Number three involves trust, refusing to follow our own ideas on life. And by this, I mean, we got to learn not to lean on our understanding. We got to understand that it's not, we don't need to know how everything turns out before it happens. We don't need to know that. We must decide to trust Him no matter what He may do. Remember, our God is able to deliver us from your hand, O King. But if He does not, we still won't bow. We don't have to know whether it's going to turn out favorably or unfavorably. What we need to know is that we're going to serve Him no matter what. And then the last one says, acknowledge Him in all your ways. The Hebrew word for acknowledge carries the idea of intimate knowledge. It intimates it's such a deep, close relationship that He knows our ways and we know His. Sometimes, we're adults here. You've heard, you say, well, He knew her in a biblical sense. This is the root word from that. That's how deeply we know God's ways and our ways. The truth that's supposed to be in our private lives and our public lives as well. And then God gives us the last direction. He says, and I will make your path straight. If you acknowledge me in all your ways, I will make your path straight. He gives us the grace to see straight paths. Whether it's through His Word, whether it's through prayer, through godly counsel, through the Holy Spirit. Trust is an absolute necessity in your relationship with God. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a type of person that sometimes what people say goes in here and out here. You know what I mean? So, I like to do visuals every once in a while. And for me, I hope you understand it. If you haven't listened to anything else, or if you've slept through everything else, watch this, all right? So this is the world. This is the world in which we live in, this jar. This water is us. We are part of the world. We are in the world, but not part of the world, so to speak. Okay? God, in His mercy, is over our world when we allow Him to. Even if our world gets turned upside down, God still holds it together. And sometimes it's very easy because we see God is holding us together. Here's the hard part. Even with, we feel we can't see God anymore. We don't know what He's up to. Sometimes it's like, Lord, are you still there? He's still holding our world together, even when we can't grasp hold of that. So our trust has to be in Him. It has to be in Him. Our trust can't be in what we can do. Lean not on our own understanding. Oh Lord, if you deliver me, fine. If you don't, fine. I am still to serve you. It's a difficult place to get to. Once you're there, it's a freeing part. It's learning to lean. Once I leaned out on that rope, wow. You should see me in the summertime. After 6 months of being up there, I'd be leaning out there. Not proud of this, but I would try to spit on their hard hats as they were looking up. Because they're down there, so you got to judge it. If the wind would go or whatever. So it was kind of one of those things. But God holds our world together if we trust Him. And I was going to have Jason come up and do that over his head to see if he trusted me, but He said, maybe my feet, I don't know. But God holds our world together until we leave this world. And once we leave this world, then, we're with him. All right? You understand? This is the world. This is us in the world. Let me put a little more in it. This is us in the world. God's over us. He holds our world together. Even when our world gets turned upside down and we think, God, where are you in all of